Thank you for all coming today. We're going to just sort of talk amongst ourselves and reference some short pieces of film that we've made or Alison's made with us during the time that we've been working. We're not going to, we do these sharings every week, so we're not going to go back in a sort of timeline of what we've done. We're going to talk more about things that we think may be important. There's quite a lot of footage and images and huge amounts of stuff, so we've just picked out some little parts of that.
As a prompt for us as well as a chance for you to see some things.
And we thought we should, because of the conversation we had earlier today, we thought we should just define some terms or say that we may use the same words at points, probably mean slightly different things to us. So if it is confusing, just ask us. And the main one is material and how we use that in different ways. And so
material as the things outside the body, and material as something that comes from the body. Yeah.
But we'll probably just use the same word in a way, so you stop us if you're not sure what we're talking about. So, would you like to?
Shall we start by watching? So this little hand section that you saw was quite early on in the process, and one of the things we had done in the first few days was put sheets on the wall and write lots of words on those sheets of paper that we wanted to discuss and that seemed important or relevant to us. And out of this list, we built a little something unfolded, which went into the fold, to unfold, to undo, to unmake, to break, to scratch, to unpack, to unpick, to place, to erase, to mark, to stitch, to frame, to fold. And so in the little video that you saw, I took this list as my starting point for creating this little sketch. And I guess what was quite unusual for me was working at that level, working at a table. Yeah, that was quite interesting, just the pressure applied, that feels quite different, having this surface of play.
We should probably explain that we were, when we were at Farnham, we were based in quite a small office-type space, but we ventured out into other places, and we found ourselves often in the textile studio. And in some ways, though, it was because there was a familiarity, maybe for me, in that there was this table, which was sort of waist height. They're printing tables. And in my studio, I have a large table in the middle, and I walk and traverse the table, often working on my feet. So that was a familiar space to me, but actually, now I'm remembering, several people, Alison included, had also mentioned the table and thought that they may enjoy the space. And also the space was very light and bright, had a lot of the outside coming in. And for me, I was investigating these common words, but around thinking about the activity of what had gone on before we entered the room over whatever period of time. It could be years or a few hours before, so sometimes going through the rubbish bins and finding tape pins, marks that people had left behind, and really at that point starting to investigate some of the textile studio and the wonderful things that were left behind. It was holiday time, so almost like an empty ship.
We were gathering.
Yeah, it felt like the presence of human activity in extreme proximity, but the evidence of people had gone. So it was almost, and I think because they'd just before that been getting ready for their shows, they'd obviously been in sort of heightened activity, so there were things sort of left and strewn. So it was quite interesting to sort of understand what had been going on.
And as the weeks, and as the days went by, we returned to that space quite a lot, and to this space we just saw with the tables, but also next door, which was just an empty floor space, and we used that quite a lot and worked. Well, Helen worked on the floor as well, and so not on the day of the film, but very shortly afterwards, the following day, Stephen Boyce came in. There are four contributors that are invited to join us in some sessions and ask questions about what we are doing and join in the conversation. And Stephen Boyce is a poet, and we thought we'd read his response to watching us working in a way not unsimilar to what we saw. Like a whisper of graphite on paper, or a dream of fading ink, a body in motion leaves a ghost print. In the room, a slight reverberation, a trace that feathers towards the edges of awareness. And parts of the body, hands for instance, also paint the space, as they weigh their weight, enclose emptiness, touch distances, define boundaries, breach frontiers, hands that speak and listen, resist, accept, shelter, reveal, invoke, defy, confront, repeal, hands in rhythm, in harmony, in unison. Or a hand like a sail catching the breeze, like a wing lifting into flight, like a leaf or an upturned star, like pebbles shifting in the tide, like a piston, a pivot, a fan, a flag, a vessel, a lever, an axe, un abri, un éclair, une feuille, un flambeau, une aile, elle, il, le. So yeah, that was his response. I guess he watched us and was drawn to our use of hands, particularly the differences and the similarities.
And at that point, I've never been filmed very much. In fact, over the past year, I've been filmed more than ever before, and I suppose that's directly because it's easier to do so just with a camera or phone. But for me, it's been quite an incredible journey watching some of this. And so those first moments, because they're very early, of seeing hands and together or not together have been quite amazing things to digest and think about and understand what we're actually doing in close proximity without maybe knowing.
So levels of connection, maybe.
Yeah.
Unconscious or unconscious or subconscious.
Yeah. So.
So I was kind of interested when you look at the little snippet film that we just saw and listened to what you've both been saying. And were those two pieces filmed at the same time, or did one respond to the other, or were you unaware of what each was doing? Just be interested to hear.
Yeah,
how that
it's
worked.
one of the first times that it's the first time we went out of our sort of office space and found another space. So it's the first time, and we walked into the room and we started quite quickly.
We had made a plan as to what we were going to do. Well, we knew what we had a sort of a frame around what we might do, but we didn't know what would happen. And those are happening at exactly the same time. And in the first instance of the first part of the residency, I feel that I wasn't watching as much as Laïla was watching. But I think, It's just we've been sense talking a lot about. So there's watching and there's maybe sensing.
So it's very interesting to see the sensing. Yeah.
It's probably a good point to say about the films that you see, none of them have been staged. It's all about being in the right place with the camera at the right time. And some of it, when you look at it, it's so beautiful, some of it almost feels like it's been choreographed, but it's completely just as they've been working. And those two hands, I seem to remember because I had the camera, and I just became aware that I had these two sets of hands working completely independently of each other, but somehow they were working together, and it was just a sort of revelation to all of us, wasn't it, that we could look in that way.
And so, as you were working together, as time went on, how long did it take for you to influence one another, or in terms of movement? Because the two movements are so different in intent, and it's interesting to know how much it starts.
You might start to see.
I think so. Maybe watch a bit more, and you see. But we have approached it from lots of different angles. So,
there was something that happened a couple of days ago, in which, at a particular moment, I'm sorry, but at a particular moment, there was a common piece of material that they had decided to make common, and obviously they did it very differently. And one of the things that we became very alert to is don't alter one to the other. In other words, don't teach to one, but keep that idea of a familiar movement and allow the separation of the history of the body and the history of the need of that body to exist well in that movement, even though the movement was same. So the idea of influence was it's not about teaching somebody in a way. I know that's not what it would be. More about putting those things side by side and then seeing.
So
just seeing that, just noticing.
I think noticing. Yeah. But you will probably see many experiences. Shall we watch the second one or two?
Yeah. So.
Teaching, the learning is the same word.
Teaching, yes.
It's the same thing. There isn't a
Say again?
So the Maori concept of teaching and learning, teaching people and learning from people is represented by the same word. There isn't a separation. It's thought before that.
As someone who photographs or films himself quite a lot, I'm a visual artist primarily, but I use process and movement. For me, the value is that you can be in the moment doing the thing that you're doing without having to analyse. And then to be able to go back and look at it, then you can see patterns. You can decide to reject them or edit them or whatever, but it's just there. You're not having to consciously be doing it, and you can actually allow yourself to get lost and progress and just be doing. And I think that's so important, to be able to separate sometimes the sort of just getting into the flow and then having to then look back and go, oh, that's happened.
Nice surprises sometimes.
Yeah, very nice surprises.
Well, sometimes it's kind of a level of awareness, right? We want to be aware, but you're right, sometimes it's about maybe losing a sense of centre in what you're doing and you're wanting to be...
Or that you're being particularly drawn to something, you didn't realise that you kept going back to that particular thing, and you think, oh, that's obviously important. Maybe I'll go there deliberately now and see what happens.
Quite early on also, we had made a little bit like this, as we did too, that Suno witnessed a couple of days ago. We had worked on a small movement sequence together. Again, just as a way of sharing a little bit of each other's worlds. And so we had 5 movements, and the idea was to do them together, not in unison, but in the awareness of one another and listening. And one of the conclusions after that, we were like, oh, let's try it with making 10 things. And we did various, we had various attempts at that. We were very ambitious at first. We had paint and so many things that became quite clearly too many things. In fact, we realized that adding one material required lots of actions. There was a lot. It's not one element. One thing required lots of different decisions. Choices needed being made. So
And
we narrowed it down.
at the same time, we had a sort of limited palette of things. I say limited. It's quite. It was a suitcase full of stuff that I brought with me, and then we went shopping. We got some more things to the hardware store, and we went to the art shop, and we had paper, and the paper was in different formats, from sort of large scale, I don't know what size scale it's called, but that you could roll out as, you know, a large canvas for the floor, to smaller, you can see lots of things around, smaller fax roll type paper. And actually the paper became part of what we've been doing. I think it's because it's a really good material to be able to express various things through, and for me to test out kind of tensions and different feeling within that, but also it's transportable. You can move it around, and we've been able to gather ideas with it and use it in different ways, from writing to pulling. So this is
a little experiment in making.
this is Google Docs.
As well that the sound is speeded up too. So the funny plinky sound is the fact they've got some music on.
Yeah, so we were talking about the paper, and I guess the movement of the paper was also our frame. So we were testing out that, but for me, putting in a new timing element. And for you, putting in
the manipulation of
yeah.
the paper. But yeah, so I guess the timing of the paper was this thing we shared, wasn't it?
Yeah,
so that was the constant.
Yeah, the paper roll was controlling the timing in a sense.
And the fact that it's sped up is not because it's simply to give you a taste of it, not necessarily.
You said it was an experiment in making that film, or that was an experiment in making. Was it? Were you making something, or was it an experiment in material manipulation?
I had a question mark as I used the word, in fact, because I think what we added was from going from movement sequences manipulating rather than making.
If you're making something, manipulating to make something, but I would have thought the biggest difference in that would be Helen would more regularly have a target to be making a thing.
Yeah.
And if you were to engage in the same things, there perhaps wouldn't be that. The material wouldn't have such a sort of strong role in needing to become something.
I think that's true. And I think probably my focus in that was in the moment, not really thinking about an outcome or a thing at the end.
But the ending of that as well was maybe the start of a significant point for me because I don't like these endings so much. Some people here have already heard this story, but during my sort of education and then the early part of my career, the ultimate thing was to produce things that were shown in galleries by themselves, and I had a frustration from early on that I didn't always feel that was the best thing to show or didn't tell something, and hence my moving towards more process-based ideas in my work. And so I began to early on have a dislike for the words endpoint, and so actually it was about 2005 I did an exhibition, I curated an exhibition called Process Works, and somebody wrote essays, Paul Harper, and he gave me the term resting point for those points instead, which was really good because it didn't feel like it was this end, but actually what you just saw, the paper coming into the screen, is a newfound end point, and it's only one of quite a lot, which endpoints that I found through and with Laïla of a sense of timing where we come together at an end point or a sound,
joint recognition that
something happens, or a really sort of boom kind of end point as well, which so for me that's been a really nice
Can I just push that a little bit further? So in terms of the resting points you recognise, would they then be starting points put together, or are you happy to leave them where they are? In which case, do you fear that other people would never see them? Because there's no exhibition space, there's no performative space in which you would invite someone in just to see that resting point. Or is it enough?
I think some of it's about generation of work, because we were talking about where do you start, what do you do, and actually for me the thought was more, I can imagine knowing when something's finished in a different way, knowing something about the work differently, and I probably don't know exactly what that is or where it might come out, but just knowing something about it and maybe using that in a way.
But I think recent thoughts, and probably just questions for us more than answers at this point, around I think what you're talking about are about what of the process we would choose to show, what is for us, and what part we would like to share.
Or whether it needs to be shown. Only I can see that your main aims have been to look at the processes, and I think that's a really valid thing to be doing, just to be there making and seeing each other's practices. I work with 2 collaborative groups, and we have such fun at that stage, but the times when the challenges come are when we, 1, recognise we want to make something, 2, to work out, well, what on earth is it? Because we try to find something that is more of a fusion of 2 or more practices. I work with 6. And are you trying to make something that is going to work in a parallel sort of position? No, I'm not trying to force you into this. I'm just saying that is the point at which sometimes we can have communication difficulties.
I think we're not there yet. No. It's an incredible opportunity to sort of find something out about our own processes as well as...
I think you're absolutely right to give it a lot of time. It seems to me that collaboration needs it if you're going to go somewhere where there's a leap of faith into a different place where you're uncomfortable.
Are already maybe thinking about that. So what would it be?
I don't want to pull you to that end at this stage because there's lots more to talk about. But I just, since you brought it up,
the offer from us is that, and my curiosity is that it does take time to dismantle and remantle a practice, and if you're going to be working side by side with somebody, then part of that is to disentangle yourself from yourself and allow something else, the oxygen from somebody else, to alter.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
So that has been important to me for a while, and every single time we approach it, the idea of spending time together becomes more valuable. But in and of itself, the further offer is what will come out of that and how much together we're able to support the real thing that comes out of it rather than the forced thing that comes out of it. But there is a real desire and a real will to notice what that's going to be and then to help that thing rather than...
Yeah. You should say that, I mean, some of this means that there are times when I'm not going to say we, because I can only speak for myself, but that I really feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I think that actually I think that's an amazing opportunity, because just to be in that space where you feel very vulnerable, I think maybe something changes. So there is some of that as well, of like what it is, but I think really hard and sort of dig deep.
It's quite unusual to be invited to sharing with someone that you haven't decided to work with or hasn't invited you. It comes from, it's really unusual, and that adds, I think, to the time needed. We were so excited about it, so curious, and have so many questions for them. The first few weeks were just, and now it's slowing down a little bit.
And how did that come about? Did you put the two artists together?
Alison and I. Yeah. I mean, it was I can't remember when we started the idea, a while ago, nearly 2 years ago.
It kind of stems from the idea that I would like to explore the idea of having an artist in residence in the Diallo Studios and how they might soak up what was going on.
Yes.
And I knew of Helen's work. I knew that she was very interested in the process, and so she seemed quite an ideal person to talk to. And then we knew Laïla, soon as Laïla more than I did. And again, it was about finding someone who had that same sensibility about that curiosity, and also the ability to be very open and generous with what they were sharing. So we didn't know that they would work together, that they may still fall out.
We keep saying the last sharing will be fine.
But it was very much a discovery for us as well, two mediums and two different people.
But there's to me, and it's a very personal thing, is it feels as if there is a series of uncoverings and thought processes in the craft world which are very parallel to some of the things that are happening in the dance world, about admiring and recognising the history of how these things have come into being, but at the same time turning around and going, what's the jump start? Or you don't forget the history, but you kind of make a dogleg or a leap across the tracks to some other place. And that both of these worlds, I can see artists in both of these worlds sort of mid-air while they're jumping this track.
And the fact you feel vulnerable, I think, is so positive, because it means you are going to a unique, different threshold. Have you had to support each other in that sort of vulnerability stage at all?
Yeah. That's up to me. So, actually,
yeah.
And it's a very supportive environment.
Yeah.
It's not like, but we've had times where it was me going to home, or I had my sort of weekly but moment that I was aware of, I'm sure, and vice versa. Times where feeling like you lose hold a little bit. But yes, it's been useful. So usually there's one of us who's able to go, let's turn it down its head and look at it from this angle. So yeah. Do you want to see next? Yeah. Looking at that, I can see that I was searching for what it was that I was doing. It wasn't clear. I didn't have a clear idea. I was playing with the objects, but so not really about what this specific little clip says, but what it prompts me to talk about is something about touch. I guess that's where the gloves came in. We bought gloves because we talked about touch, how crucial that is, and what if the touch was not direct but gloved? And what
there
that
were
might
gloves
be.
everywhere as well at Farnham. There
Yeah.
were glove dispensers of many different types everywhere.
Yeah.
So
It's very
for
much
me
of
it was
a
a lot of
place,
gloves.
isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Something around that, and contact with the floor again. And for me, there is an interest in something we realised we share is like showing traces of the presence, or making, showing an absence. And so, for me, there's something about that in a pair of shoes or a pair of gloves that aren't bodied, aren't worn. Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to say about it.
Yeah, but I suppose that at this point, because the next clips are from the same afternoon of making, and I guess we were both thinking about traces and exploring a word. There's several words that have been very important: traces, edges, frames. Leaving a trace of feeling, maybe. Well, I suppose it just reminded me of when we had the 2-week break between Farnham and here. And I suppose what you're seeing there are some of the objects, the things of a place. They're very much of that place. Those stainless steel buckets are dye buckets, and they're all numbered, and they have different weights, and so the marks that are left from those are very much of that place. But when we arrived here, we unravelled some of these things that we've made during that process, and we haven't looked at the larger sheets, which is what we're working on here, but they almost became sort of shared memories of the activity, and something without the film that we can remember moment, but also maybe speed of something, quality of something, remember something of the material, of the edginess. It made me think of edginess of things, so I guess that's something that we brought with us, and we don't necessarily need to even look at it. We've got the things here. If we need them, they're there, but just the presence of them. And again, there are some moments in these films again where if you see us together, the same thing. We're coming together in a sort of conscious, subconscious, unconscious way, and some of it's the sound as well, obviously. But,
earlier on, you spoke very nicely about finding sort of grounding of a table. You find the table in another space. But since that first film, worked primarily on the floor, that you kind of regrounded your ground on the same ground that they were working on. Do you think that given your kind of disparate starting positions, that you kind of sought to find a sort of unifying ground on which you kind of play out your sort of figurations and representations and things? Because I don't see any table in here either, so I'm assuming you're
tableless.
pointing out and you're colouring on the floor. Do you think it's just this kind of literally finding common ground with being finding ground?
When we got to Farnham, we were asked what we wanted, and we quickly said, we'll have an empty room. So we had
But you went to look for that table, and you recognised it?
Yes, so that was, and actually I have thought about table the past few days and whether we could do, well, because the next thing we're going to share with you maybe explores some of what we may think about, but maybe table will come into it. But actually, I've seen it as an opportunity to be on the floor. Because I was in the studio the other day looking and thinking, is there enough room? Get on the floor.
Transfer everything to the floor. Well, we've also been talking about paper, that big role as possible shared environment. So, yeah, maybe there is something of finding common ground in that.
And also the other thing is, because I've been working without shoes. In fact, you had shoes on in Farnham, and I didn't have them. But I found that an extra stimulation in the sense of the pickup of the paper. It's been really important, and especially since I've now been watching men speak quite a lot, so having them, not having shoes on has been quite important. I've got bruises on my knees.
Do you? I'll bring you some knee pads. Before we do our big scene.
Can I just say one thing after that? Because there's so much time and attention brought to getting the most out of the tin, the carbon paper and the mark left. So you continuously went at it. And one of the important parts for Ali and I, in fact, was always the blog and how we were going to put information out. So that the privacy of this was incredibly important, but the tension to that privacy was how we'll be able to, in the right way, put information out there. So for somebody not involved in our world necessarily, I think to experience this idea of the attention to whatever material it is, redoing it, reworking it, refinding it, renoticing it, redoing it. So I'm not, somebody help me, but there is, in the Maori way, there is a learning and a teaching all in one tool. If you wish to use it, it should be there. I mean, it will be there, but it should be there for the...
As a kind of provocation for other people to pick up.
As a companion, maybe, or as a curiosity, but this idea of attending to something, and whenever I come in to watch or be and probably chat too much, when I do, it's the attending to doing it. And it isn't always a bit of a wild, fun experiment. It's, so what does this do? And what do I feel as I am doing this? And oh, she's doing it, and then trying to see what else is happening in that.
I love that bit at the end where you go there where I don't remember it, but my fingers saying, let it
go, let it continue.
But you also said it was during these points that you discovered the end point.
Yeah, no, what it is, no, definitely. But then since then that's grown, which has started, which brings us on to our next. Do you want to explain anything about
well, I guess, okay, so yes, I mentioned this getting into movement sequence, shared movement sequence, and we revisited this idea in a number of guys, in a number of ways the other day. So again, back kneeling on the floor, sitting on a bench, against the wall. So, and you're going to see something that we did against the wall, which we found interesting in just the attention to the contact. The contact was something that was useful, it felt, to us both.
I suppose in the stainless steel containers here, you see the use of resistance. I actually trained in metal, so I suppose I maybe use metal and various types of metal as a point of resistance. I work with steel a lot, and stainless steel is even harder. So the wall, what you'll see next, we could talk about afterwards.
Well, resistance is a word that is really part of both of our worlds, resistance and weight, and giving weight.
Yeah.
So that felt like a bit of a
yeah.
Really romantic music. So yeah, noticing something about the touch, about the difference each time you come to that wall. Sense of one another, and also we were, this is kind of dizzying, so we had to close our eyes as we approached the wall, because that's quite strange what it does to your eyes. But also thinking about, locating the gaze, and we're looking at a very specific point, Barnet Fair, out there.
Which actually is quite an important point, because when in my work, I do a lot of walking around areas and collecting photographs of place and things that say something about a place, and finding things and using those materials. And we've been in here this week, and so we are going to venture out more, but we started to look out at this. You'll see it as you leave. You have to have a look. Barnet Fair. Obviously, it used to be a hairdresser's. At the moment, it's going through some sort of change. So we were experimenting, doing a movement piece, sitting on the bench, and it was very internal, really. But we described the points between moves and what they meant in words to us, and they were slightly different, but we were thinking about similar things. And then the external view of outside. And what I really enjoyed was the looking again and re-looking and putting in timing to the looking. So I'd glance at it and see something and then look back for longer. And what a nice way to be able to then look at something for myself when I'm outside it. So from here we were looking at Barnet Fair. Hence the laughter at the end, because it all got a bit too much.
Eldorado.
There's a bit after Barnet Fair. Yeah. But and for me the exploring of the material and the memory of the material, I suppose, has been very invigorating.
Did you consciously, at one point I noticed Laïla changing the timing, because from a dancerly point of view that would be one of the things you would deal with, whereas in that context you might not have thought about changing the timing, but within your own context, if you change the timing while working something, it obviously has an impact on what you do.
Maybe remembering that timing.
Yes, and I would just...
but it's...
curious.
No, it is. Yeah. We'll often say, suppose a like drawing to making as well, speeding something up gives it completely different quality or edge of something. So changing it. I mean, I suppose doing it in silence, because I was being very much guided by the music, because obviously for me as well, I think because I'm familiar with using music in my work, especially, I don't use it all the time, but especially if I'm a bit stuck, or needing to get into something, I might use music in specific tempo.
So we always ask, music on the music? Because we're kind of aware of the huge impact it has.
Of music, so we haven't used it. And then we thought today that, taking away the wall would be so. When we Laïla did the class this morning, I watched the class this morning, so it really made me think again about weight and time.
I'm curious, sorry to go back to the previous one, but actually, hopefully, for me it had a very sense of performance for you, Helen. That performative, that manipulation of the team. And I was wondering whether that's something that has been, you've noticed that as part of this process, or is that something you would do anyway?
No, it's something I would do. It's quite. I think that material is performative, so you have to get it to perform. But actually being in the room with Laïla has meant that I may be pushing it a bit, which is really nice. But also being in that space on the floor, so maybe I'm able, and also in that film, we had a really good afternoon. I really felt like I'd spent time at various things, so was able to take something through a sort of repertoire of testing it, yeah. So really bouncing it around and doing different things, and because we're in this phase of just trying stuff out, also just pushing it, so if it doesn't work, doesn't matter, just pushing it off and trying something else.
But is it the fact of filming it that makes it become...
Well, that's laden there as well, isn't it? There's always that other, it's suddenly, it's the media.
It is formative in itself, isn't it? But then it becomes objectified as a performance within the frame of the film. But it's,
But I think...
But I just think, because Sue's point about the attention, there seems to be something other than just the manipulation.
But that's, if you want to push something, that's exactly what you have to do.
Yeah.
You really have to push it out and try all the edges of it, basically. So you are doing that. And I mean, in order to turn something flat into something formed, you really have to push it. So a lot of my career has been hammering stuff out. And so, that is, it's very physical.
And then with Laïla, with the manipulation of material and objects, is that something you normally do in your practice?
A little bit. Not a huge amount, but more so of late. Yes, Helen came to see the piece I did most recently. Tape! A little bit of tape in it. But I'm really interested in it. But no, it's not huge, it's new, I would say. So to me, but I'm interested in that, in moving things around and things with people and without. And I guess it's somehow, I guess my work is starting to be populated with objects. But it's different from a raw material like paper. Paper's not a thing, but so yes, manipulating objects, yes.
I mean, just to go back further, the list of words that you mentioned that you kind of had in the beginning, there were a lot of something, a lot of kind of undoing, or not necessarily from a negative angle, but kind of sort of rethinking, I don't know, stripping back. In order to practice, starting from a place of nothing.
We talked about that because actually in making, in order to understand how something's made, you've got to be able to unmake it, either in your head or literally. And moving things around, maybe lay things out so that you can put them back together again. So it's very much a reverse and then
and letting go at times as well.
And it's the time, I guess. I don't know, to me, all those uns and undoing and unthinking it indicates that kind of time that it takes.
It's interesting, just from an observational point of view, watching the way you both work together, is how you set the parameters. So on two levels, one being this idea of frame and setting a frame, using paper in the first videos as the framing, and that relating to the way you use the different interpretations of the material. So you have the framing in the artwork of the literal physical object, and you have the framing of the movement in space, and the way those two can sort of cross over and creates this really nice open space to sort of go freely with. But then there's this other idea of the parameters of the desk space. I mean, as an artist, I know how important a desk work is, but it does constrict you, and the moment that's away from the space, you're kind of liberated, and it creates a different kind of movement, it seems to be about literally just setting these different parameters for you to sort of pivot around.
The word testing comes back a lot, but yes, because possibilities seem infinite. It's good to set some parameters to test what we know and what we don't know.
But parameters that almost can be interpreted in many different ways, I suppose.
Your list of undo and pick is almost the opposite of Richard Serra's, the sculptor's list. He has a list of words, but they're very pro. Do this, do that, do this. So it's quite interesting. You went the opposite way to him.
The first one is to unfold.
His is probably to fold.
His is to fold.
Well, we're just after half past, so if there's one more question, I think we should finish that.
You have a sense of where it's going next. So you've still got some time together, haven't you?
Well, we've made a list of 2 things next week. No, we do feel like what we still want to challenge, and that's kind of ongoing, is how working on things all the time, which we are doing, but one task all the time, and insisting.
We want to take a bit longer over something.
Yeah.
And out of the room. Yesterday we busted out the room with some rolls of paper just because it was like you've got
Down the stairwell.
So yeah.
Just on the unfold, fold. I think there's a tendency for I can't think of the other art forms, but for dance to accumulate. So that you accumulate one movement after another, and you accumulate different learnings from it. And when do you not do that? And how do you not do that constructively? So I think that's one of the joys. I did some work with the writer who constantly was talking about dismantling the sentence in order to actually get to the sense of it. And you might be able to do with less words the thing you wanted to say if you dismantled the sentence.
Yes, there's something of that. So in moving or improvising around an idea, I'm thinking, God, I recognise this, or this is, of a time, or reminds me of somebody, or of a piece, or a place in a piece that I did, and it's kind of letting those things. For me, one way of doing it is to just be aware of them and keep working until it moves on. That makes sense.
I think they're coming from a more making background, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I think it is also a very individual thing. Some people start from the middle of a spiral and work outwards, and some people work out and work and edit and come straight in. So I don't know that there is necessarily one way that is particularly towards one practice.
But I just think there's like, or we said, for me there was a tradition of adding the learning, the learning, and it was a real learning thing when I turned around and said, I might not have to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.